Protagonists of heroes can come in all different shapes, size, forms, and any other differentiating terms that you can think of. They're all built differently, and what one hero may do could be the furthest thing from another's mind. Something that you wouldn't and couldn't expect every movie hero to do, though, would be to save the life of the person that they're fighting. In a lot of these movie situations, it's kill or be killed, with potentially even worse consequences in play, and so these conflicts are often final, but that's not always the case. And with that in mind, I'm Josh from WhatCulture.com, and these are 10 movie heroes that saved the villain's life. Number 10, Bruce Wayne saved Ra's al Ghul, Batman Begins. With every new iteration of Batman, there is always the question of how new filmmakers will handle the character's infamous no-killing rule. Christian Bale's Batman famously stuck to it very closely, though found a loophole at the end of the first movie that definitely is worth mentioning, while Ben Affleck's version threw it out the window entirely and was massacring dudes left, right, and center. However, while the former may have neglected to save Ra's al Ghul during the conclusion of Batman Begins, this wasn't the first time that he fought the character. See, it was old Ra's under the guise of Ducard who trained Bruce Wayne before their key ideological differences pushed them apart. The villain was of the mind that to be a true vigilante and to exact justice, Bruce needed to be able to kill. Bruce, of course, disagreed and even took things one step further. As his former mentor slid down the icy mountain towards certain death, Bruce went to great lengths and pain to save his life. Whether this was to prove a point or because he genuinely didn't want to see the man he knew was Ducard dead is certainly up for debate, but even so, he put his own life at great risk to save the villain who risked it to begin with. Number 9. Dale saved Mr. Harkin, Horrible Bosses. Now, the word hero may be a little strong for the protagonists of Horrible Bosses, but there is no doubt that Mr. Harkin was an absolute villain. He treated people like garbage, he was a vicious murderer, and he worked Nick into the ground, promising a promotion that he ultimately gave to himself. In the story, he drove his employee to want to murder him outright, something that both Dale and Nick had in common with their bosses. After agreeing to each murder the other's boss, they did a little recon on Harkin, and while Nick and Kurt crept around inside, Dale was the lookout. And all in all, he was admittedly a pretty crap lookout, as he littered right in front of Harkin, who took exception to him, though handling the wrapper of the peanut butter sandwich sent his allergies into overdrive. And had Dale just driven off at this point, this would have been job done, 1 down and 2 more bosses to go, with absolutely no reason to be suspected. Instead, though, the livable idiot that he was, Dale took Harkin's EpiPen and saved his life. Number 8. Superman saved Lex Luthor, Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. After trying and failing to get Batman to kill Superman, Lex Luthor turned to the ancient Kryptonian monstrosity known as Doomsday. Literally brought to life by Luthor with the sole purpose of killing the Man of Steel, there was always a risk of things going, let's say, a little bit tits up. With a mindless, raging monster, there was always the danger that he wouldn't only target Superman, and that's exactly what happened, as the very first thing the Beast did was set Luthor firmly in its crosshairs and go swinging. Now, had Doomsday connected his fist to Lex Luthor's defenseless face, there's absolutely no doubt that he would have been killed. And after everything that he had done to Clark Kent and the people that he loved, no one would have really blamed Superman for just letting this happen. However, that's just not who this guy is. The world's most famous superhero is the beacon of hope and everything right in the world, and though he did brutally snap Zod's neck in the previous flick, he wasn't about to let Luthor die. It was a bit apples and oranges. Zod was threatening the entire planet, whereas at this point Luthor was no longer the threat, only a mere potential victim for the Man of Steel to save. Number 7. Aragon saved Wormtongue, The Lord of the Rings: The Two Towers. There are plenty of different villains throughout Middle-earth and the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and though Wormtongue wasn't anywhere near the levels of the likes of Sauron, Saruman, or even Gollum, he was one of the most hated characters in the entire franchise. And that's because it was through Wormtongue at King Theoden's side that Saruman was able to poison the mind of Rohan's king. Theoden was powerless, and Wormtongue took every single advantage of the situation that he could after playing an integral role in the king's downfall to begin with. And so, understandably, upon being released from Saruman's influence, Theoden looked to take revenge on Wormtongue. I mean, Who wouldn't? He had his mind poisoned and was unable to even care that his own son had died. I think we can all agree that Wormtongue deserved some kind of retribution, and this would have come straight from the King's Sword had it not been for Aragon, the true hero of The Lord of the Rings. Enough blood had been spilled on account of Saruman's pawn, and the son of Arathorn dived at Theoden to stop him from spilling even more. Number 6, T'Challa saved Zemo, Captain America Civil War. There were a lot of moving pieces within Captain America Civil War, and a lot of that was due to Zemo's ridiculous plan. Though he wanted to tear the Avengers down from within, he saw to it that many innocent people were hurt along the way. Much of this blood was spilled when he bombed the UN disguised as Bucky Barnes, as King T'Chaka was killed and his son T'Challa swore vengeance on the Winter Soldier for it, never once considering that all was not how it seemed. And of course, that ultimately led him to chasing down the wrong man. The Black Panther followed Steve, Bucky, and Tony to Siberia, where he was able to learn the full extent of the truth, the guilt of Zemo, and even speak with the man himself. It turned out that he regretted killing T'Chaka, but had accomplished his goals as Captain America and Iron Man tore each other apart. His mission finally completed, Zemo then tried to end his own life, but T'Challa put a vibranium-covered hand in the way. The living weren't done with him yet, though T'Challa was done letting vengeance consume him. Number 5, Heather saves Leatherface, Texas Chainsaw 3D. Now you'll notice that most of this list concerns superhero movies, and that's because it's kind of expected in those flicks that the heroes are truly good people who would rather see villains brought to justice rather than brutally murdered. You kind of expect mercy, but you don't expect mercy in a horror movie. After all, in those flicks, characters are usually desperate to just survive, and saving the villain would just see them turn around and behead you for trying. That's not quite the case in Texas Chainsaw 3D though, where our hero Heather saves the iconic bad that is Leatherface and actually becomes best mates with him. Now, let's backtrack. Initially, old Leatherface is hunting down Heather and her friends, but this all changes when it's revealed that the two are actually related. Following this nuts and out of nowhere twist, the two decide to join forces, with Heather even saving her long-lost cousin from near death and then chucking him his death-bringer chainsaw. So, not only does she save the villain of the piece, she actually decides to join him. Does it make any sense? Absolutely not, but it certainly gives us an interesting list entry. Number 4, ELASTAGIRL saved EVELYN, Incredibles 2. After The Incredibles, in which the villain wanted to be the world's greatest superhero, the sequel's villain hated superheroes completely and without exception. Evelyn Diva blamed supers for her father's death and believed that they weakened society as something of a safety net. Her bid to bring the entire super community to its knees was ultimately ruined by the Parr family, though Helen was very much at the center of everything, as it was she who battled the Screenslaver from the very beginning, and it was she who ended the conflict. After fighting Evelyn on her plane, the villain found herself flying through the air, dropping down toward the middle of the ocean in what would have been a certain death sentence. ELASTAGIRL, however, with some help from Void, made sure that she didn't escape this way. Helen fell after Evelyn and grabbed her, and though the villain broke free once, the hero managed to grab her again before Void gave them a portal directly back onto the boat instead of into the open water. Even after being saved though, she still saw superheroes as the problem, though admittedly as she was hauled off to a prison cell instead of a watery grave. Number 3, Spider-Man saved everyone. Spider-Man No Way Home. Okay, so we've had superheroes who save one villain, but what about 5 in one movie? Well, when Peter Parker and Stephen Strange messed up an incredibly dangerous spell that they were warned against performing in the first place, they ended up breaking the multiverse. And as such, people from across different universes who knew the true identity of Spider-Man were brought into Earth 616. Now, Strange noted that the 5 villains they were able to find had all died fighting Spider-Man in their own universe, and while that wasn't actually true, and not everyone who came across also knew the true identity of Spider-Man either, that's how the stakes of the movie will lay it out. Strange wanted to send them back to their universes to die at Spider-Man's hand, as was their fate originally. But Peter, off the back of the advice given to him by Aunt May, wanted to do everything that he could to save them before sending them home, in the hopes that their lives would be spared. And he did manage to cure all 5 villains in No Way Home, and though their returns home weren't shown on screen, in theory this did also save all of their lives. Number 2, Woody and Buzz saved Lotso, Toy Story 3. As far as the perfect ending to a trilogy goes, they don't tend to get much better than Toy Story 3. More than a decade after the release of Toy Story 2, Woody and Buzz went on what appeared for a long time to be their final adventure, and there is no one alive that could watch the movie and not shed at least a few tears. The image of Andy's toys all in the furnace heading towards their apparent doom is iconic, and burned into the memory of anyone who has ever watched it. Of course, they were all ultimately able to save themselves in this scene, and being the heroes that they are, they even managed to save Lotso along the way. Now, Lotso was a classic villain that posed as a harmless hero to begin with. Initially, everyone seemingly loved him. He loved to give out hugs and he smelled like strawberries, but of course, he was, in reality, a nasty piece of work. And when Woody and Buzz threw him out the path of certain death, he had the opportunity to return the favor. But instead of stopping the conveyor belt, that strawberry-scented just left those toys to die. But still, you know damn well enough that if Woody and Buzz had the opportunity to do it all again, they would still never leave Lotso in the predicament that he was in, even knowing that he would never do the same for them. Number 1, the X-Men saved Bolivar Trask, X-Men Days of Future Past. Most of the instances on this list have been situations of circumstance. The hero didn't necessarily go out in search of saving the life of a villain, they were instead presented with a moment in which they had to make a decision. The X-Men, however, actually went back in time to seek out Mystique and stop her from killing Bolivar Trask, in spite of the fact that he was the one who created the entire Sentinel program that sought to destroy all mutants in their post-apocalyptic future. See, in the original X-Men timeline, Trask was killed by Mystique for killing and experimenting on her fellow mutants, though this only served to make him into a martyr. The Sentinel program he was working on was then launched because he was killed by a mutant, thus proving how apparently dangerous they were. So, in response to this, Charles Xavier and Eric Lesher put their differences aside to save the entire future, and it all started with saving the life of the man who wanted them all dead, and indeed ended up indirectly killing pretty much all of them. So, that's our list. I want to know what you guys think down in the comments below. Are there any other interesting times where the hero saved the villain? And what did you think of this lot? Let me know, and while you're down there, if you could, please give us a like, share, subscribe, and head over to whatculture.com for more lists and news like this every single day. Even if you don't though, I've been Josh. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you soon.